and welcome to my final Advent window for 2024 for December the 23rd. And the question on this window is, when have you streamlined an aspect of a set of Wargames rules? Why did you do that? Which mechanism or historical motivation was behind it? And what was the result on the tabletop? One of the attendees at Lard Island in the earliest days of TooFatLardies, before 2005, once said to me that they would always prefer a great game which was a good simulation over a great simulation which was a good game. Ideally, with Wargames rules, you want to get to great games which are also great simulations, but I sometimes think that's quite difficult because those two different forces, creating a great game and creating a great simulation, don't always go hand in hand. And if you've ever played some of the older sets of Wargames rules from the 1970s, you probably understand why that is. Here I am in 2024 reading from a fast play sheet from WRG 6th edition Ancients, a reaction test. These are the things we have to consider. First time in charge, reach or shot at. Player wishes to initiate charge in response to an enemy charge against testers. Those are just three of the situations where there needs to be a reaction test. And then we go down the list of factors. Testers or friends within 150 paces advancing. Each enemy body within 150 paces retiring. Each enemy friendly body charging, countercharging or pursuing. Army standard within 300. Okay. I'll stop. Don't worry. You get the idea. It's a really good simulation of the factors which might be relevant at a very micro-tactical level on the tabletop. So it's perfect if you want to fight two units against each other. And let's be honest, and let's be fair, it gave lots and lots of great games back in the day. But it really depends what sort of game you're looking for. If you're trying to be Hannibal at Cannae, or if you're trying to be Alexander at Gaugamela, that's not the set of rules that you're really looking for. The question, great game or great simulation, which perhaps steps first onto the drawing board of your rules, is really a question about which game you want to play. And here, the focus is firmly on you, because these questions are not just about scale. They're not just about the level where you want to play your miniature historical wargame. They're not just about a choice between army scale or corps scale or battalion scale or skirmish scale. It's all about you. It's all about what you want to focus on as the wargamer. It's a very personal thing. What are you looking to represent in your wargames? And the other part of that dynamic, what are you looking to place to the side of your wargames? What's going to be centre stage when you present your game? Let me perhaps give an example. Over the last 2 or 3 years, I've been working on a collection of smaller games based on sword fighting. Firstly, With Flashing Blades, which is a game set in the 17th century and the novels of Alexandre Dumas. And more recently, When the Last Sword is Drawn, which is a game of swordplay in medieval and Edo period Japan. Swordplay is integral to both of those rule sets. We've talked before about the aspects of French schools of fencing, but to try and illustrate streamlining an aspect of miniature wargames rules, I thought I'd take just a moment to talk about my experience with Japanese swordplay. I've been interested in Japanese fighting styles for a long time, and I was brought to it through martial arts and also through the writings of a writer called Dave Lowry, who wrote some truly fantastic books, Traditions, Autumn Lightning, and my favourite, Moving Towards Stillness, in which he gave lessons for daily life taken from his experience of Japanese martial arts. So I came to the game not solely through historical context, but through Dave Lowry's writings I got more interested in the historical context of sword fighting in Japanese history. And one set of books which really helped me in that regard were the works of Professor Carl Friday, and in particular a really interesting book called Legacies of the Sword, the Kashima Shinryu and Samurai Martial Culture. I can really heavily recommend it, but it isn't an easy book to follow, because what Professor Friday does, he talks about the philosophy and the science of fighting with a sword, especially in Edo period Japan, and he looks at the developments of fighting schools, principally appearing in the 17th century, when unemployed samurai, who are no longer needed in the armies of the Sengoku period, flocked to Edo, which is the former name for the current capital of Tokyo. And those former samurai, now Ronin, were searching for work, and once they didn't find work, they sought to make a living teaching martial arts skills and set up their own schools for doing so. So Professor Friday's book goes through the different heritages and traditions in respect of different fighting styles, and in a strangely similar way, an unconnected way, to French sword fighting, each of those schools had a particular fighting style, and sometimes even a particular fighting stance. There were also different routines that those schools used for the interplay of attack and counterattack in the context of their philosophical approach to combat. Carl Friday's book is a really interesting guide to sword fighting in an urban setting, but it's not straightforward. It brings into play philosophy, the different physical properties of the weapons being used, the skills of the combatants. Those elements are really complicated, and they're viewed from a lens of a 21st century writer, albeit a really skillful academic. And then there's other books which are available from historical contemporaries. One of the most famous of those is the Gorin no Sho, the Book of Five Rings, written by the Japanese swordsman Miyamoto Musashi around about 1645. But I do find that book really quite difficult to follow, because there's so many elements of that which are philosophical as opposed to purely physical in the context of fighting. There's another very well-known book called Hagakure, which means In the Shadow of Leaves, which is another influential samurai treatise written by Yamamoto Tsunetomo. Again, it's an interesting book, but the more I've read about the author, the more I have a question as to how much fighting the gentleman actually did. So we have modern martial arts treatises, we have academic historical works, and we have the works of the historical contemporaries themselves. Three different lenses to look at one moment of history, which probably took a bare few seconds. Now, trying to design an aspect of a set of war games rules around sword fighting and trying to integrate each of those different elements is going to lead to a really complicated set of war games rules. Or another way to put that is that they could produce a fantastic simulation, and the simulation could take into account all of those different philosophies, those different schools, those different fighting stances, the different weapons being used. But would it be a good game? It would certainly potentially be an accurate game, but would it be a good game? Would people actually enjoy it? Would it be slow? Would it be detailed? Would it have reverence for the subject? All of those things are good in themselves, but are they giving the experience around the table that somebody would really want? And I felt that all of those elements were in danger of crowding out some of the enjoyment. I wanted to create something which was plausible and respectful of the source material, but also was a fun game. So I had to streamline the initial rules that we'd worked on for swordplay, while also thinking about the sources. I had to try and integrate Professor Friday's details of stances and fighting schools into signature moves for the different combatants. And I tried to weave the messages of contemporary texts like Hagakure and the Book of Five Rings into mechanisms to give a combatant longevity on the tabletop and stature. And I tried to think about the messages from martial artists like Dave Lowry, especially those messages of cultural respect, in creating an honour system which worked in the context of the game. And other things I had to leave out. And that's all of the part of the journey of streamlining the rules through constant playtesting. So what was the result on the tabletop? Well, hopefully we've had games which are fun, and not games which are too bogged down in their mechanisms and in the importation of history to become unwieldy. But no Wargames rule is completely set in stone, because every Wargames rule is always going to be viewed not just by the person who writes it, but by you, the player. And it's only by you playing those games that all of us can judge whether enough detail has been left in the game for it to be streamlined and balanced and as perfect as possible. Almost as perfect, perhaps, as the presents under your Christmas tree.